Hey everyone, this is Ron, showing off my Blazor.Aspect library. This is a library that basically gives you an extra before-after render, not inside a page, but as an interface injection. So that will allow you to compose behavior on your pages without actually adding anything into your actual pages, like adding stuff in the body of your OnAfterRender or stuff like that. You would assign the behavior to your interfaces and then assign interfaces to your pages, and by doing that you will have behavior injection. So to get in some theory first, what is aspect-oriented programming? It's basically a design pattern to remove behavior from your application, like cross-cutting stuff like this logging here, and to move your logging to a separate class so that you can inject the logging and not have your cross-cutting concerns everywhere inside your code. In normal C# you could use something like a code weaver, like you would use PostSharp, and an example that PostSharp uses is a notification change property. Basically you would have an attribute, notify property changed, you would put it on top of your class, and instead of implementing your own events and subscription and all kinds of stuff, PostSharp will weave it into your code later on. Another library that does the same is Fody, which does the same as PostSharp, but it's free. This is an example of what they do. It's the same example of code weaving notification change property into a person object. So it's the same concept. Instead of what you see below, like what gets compiled, you will basically get a notification change pattern injected into your property. Blazor, I didn't want to do this in a code weaving way, and I wanted to make it more accessible, so I wanted to do it based on an interface injection kind of way. So to get started with my library, you install it through a NuGet, and then in your program.cs you wire it up. So you will say services when assignable from an interface type, and then use an aspect of a logging thing. The interface is empty and the log renderer basically just logs to the console. So the page itself implements the iLog rendering interface. Let me make that shorter. So it just implements iLog rendering. The page itself has a log line for every page lifecycle event, just to show you where my log rendering comes in. So let's start up this logging sample. Open up the console to show you the logs itself. Let's clear all this existing stuff. So as you can see, we opened our log demo page. In the console you can see a bunch of logs coming from the page itself, log demo.razor. So if you go to the log demo razor page, that's this stuff again. So besides the normal console output, you can see this blue line, a log line coming from the library itself, telling you it applied an aspect of log component to the logging sample page. The most interesting log line though is this one, the log action that has been triggered. That's the one that we wanted. So let me show you again. That came from this log rendering action. So as you can see, it logs stuff completely independent of the page. So the second demo is this Fluxor subscription, which is the same concept of what I showed you in the PostSharp and the Fody documentation. Fluxor is a framework that lets you inject states and automatically subscribes you to those states. So the subscription that I use in this project is the same. Services, when it's assignable from an iFluxor component, use an aspect of Fluxor component subscribe. And that subscriber will handle the subscriptions for Fluxor, and to do it through an interface implementation instead of the usual way. So to show you how Fluxor works, you have a state, which is now an iState counter state, and it has a click count for the click value. And I've moved this state itself to a separate component because otherwise the counter page will re-render itself on click events. So by putting it to a separate component you can see how it works. So down here in the counter you have a dispatcher. Whenever you click the button it will dispatch a click increment event, which causes a click to go up by 1. Same as the default click demo you would see in a Blazor project, but then done through Fluxor states. Let me show you what happens if your page doesn't implement anything at all. So now if you go to the counter, we click the button, nothing happens. So the default way to do this is to inherit from this Fluxor component, which will basically do the same thing as the implementation. So what this inherited component does is on initialized, it will find all the states and subscribe to them. Let me show you how it works, or that it actually works. Now you can see the counter is going up as expected. So let's go back to the interface implementation and show you again. That's what this was about, basically. So as you can see, the counter state is still incrementing based on an interface implementation that subscribes to these states, instead of doing it through inheritance. So what else you can do with this library is assign behavior based on attributes or based on just any type expression. And you can also assign multiple behaviors. So I'll show that now by copying the logging action into my Fluxor project, so I can have both the Fluxor subscription and the logging subscription through the same page. So let's copy over this logging action, fix the namespace, then let's create a new folder for attributes, and then we add a new logging attribute in there. Logging attribute. Inherit from a normal attribute. Copy my attribute into my program CS to subscription, so then you would say builder.services.whenHas attribute, which is another extension method I created to make it easier. Logging attribute, copy the logging action again. Now let's assign my logging attribute to the page. So you'd say add attribute and then brackets your attribute. Let's move the using to the includes, or to the imports rather. So we have cleaner code in our actual Razor file. And now if we start our project, let's open the console again, clean it up. So as you see, I go to my counter, you have the logging line that's injected by the logging aspect, and the counter also still works because it's injected by the subscription. So you can also just assign behavior to any type, then you just use one type and a type expression. So I'll show you what happens. Just every time a type is not null, basically every type, log the type. Then we don't need this attribute anymore. And now if we run our application again, let's open the console. In the console, if I click around, you will see a lot of these logging events, because basically every page or every component rather gets injected with the logging behavior. So it's not really something I would advise, like every nav link, everything gets behavior. I would suggest to make it explicit to an interface it to an attribute and not assign it to a type directly, because that's how aspect-oriented programming is intended. So that's it for the BlazorAspect demo. If you're interested in any other kind of dependency injection stuff for Blazor, then you should also check out my library BlazyLoad, which fixes dependency injection with lazy loaded projects.